Okay.
Okay, Aristo, we'll try it with just audio since the audio video version of our conversation was awful with this new software.
Okay. One for the trash. Well, your voice sounds good. When I had the video connected, I couldn't hear anything again from you, and I was starting to get worried. But now that I disconnected the video, things seem to be much clearer. For some reason, your new program restricts the bandwidth now.
Yeah, I don't know. We need to do, or I need to do something with either Skype or something because since Skype updated by themselves uh, just before our last conversation, there's been real technical issues uh, getting things where they're even reasonably good. So anyway,
Can
let's.
Okay.
Where do you
Well,
where do
it's
you want to begin? We already recorded over 41, almost 42 minutes in the previous recording, and we just can't use that. So where would you like to begin this time around?
Well, this time around, since it's clear on both ends, and since I have no clue, I don't remember much of what I said. I mean, maybe the Job thing, but once it's out, it's hard to bring back and repeat.
Indeed,
You
I
know,
could
it.
never do that.
So I think we need to start on either on a different foot and see where we'll go. My intention is that I know you always have something on your mind, and that maybe we could just do this as a kind of, I mean, since it's more like a radio talk show now, we can do this more as a dialogue and see how that goes. So I'll give you the floor as because originally it would be as if, okay, we couldn't make the video, so you would probably have to make one on your own in order to fill in the blank. So you can start as if doing that, and then I can step in accordingly and see where that goes.
Okay, well, of course, when I do my own videos, I always have a title and a blurb before I begin, and that's all I have. I might have spent some time meditating and thinking about the subject, but I always have a preliminary thing just to kick me off. In any case, though, what's been on my mind a lot lately is all the things going on with SwissIndo, the people saying that, questioning it, which, good, honest questions are always worthwhile, but some people say it's impossible. I mean, just while I was listening to you before, I'm looking at some of my emails, and I have this gentleman say, prove to me that SwissIndo has the ability to distribute any funds. And I responded back, prove to me that they don't. You know, how can you prove something that's in a process? And he responded back. He says, well, my sources tell me that they don't have any authority. And I said, well, my sources tell me they do. We're going to have to just go with the flow. I'm choosing to go with it anyway and be part of the process. And you actually hit on some of that in the previous talk that you had in regard to the participation. Yeah, there's no such thing as no risk when we're living a process. There's always risk in any process. And I thought some of your comments in the previous take were very good on that subject. And maybe you'd like to take off a little bit from there.
I shall try. One thing that makes an impression on me is everybody with their sources. It sounds very cloak and dagger to me. I'm just a normal guy, maybe a little eccentric with my own experiences and stuff. But people seem to, they almost like it's a game. My sources. Who are you? Are you a journalist? Are you a spy? This whole thing. Are these sources, in on the system, or is this a hearsay matter? We tend to talk as if we're officials. We tend to mimic the matrix without even realizing we're doing so. And partly with my comments, like you said, participation and discernment. And ad nauseum, I repeat myself with this because discernment is one of the most difficult things we can acquire. We barely understand it. And instead of exercising it, we try to make others validate our own our own attempts at discernment. You prove it, you disprove it. Look, we live in an insecure world. Basically, there is no proof. The one thing that's for sure is that we know that the system itself is deceiving us. It's going to play the role of good guy, it's going to play the role of bad guy, and essentially it has its own agenda. We are the enemy. Another thing, and the more, for example, I saw this cop movie once, and there was a lawyer that was defending somebody that was very likely, and the lawyer was self-righteous, and the defendant was very likely a really nasty criminal, serial killer. So what the lawyer did first was says, look, I have to defend this guy. This is the way things are, but the lawyer hired a whole bunch of detectives to search out the dirt on this person. So, similarly, when we look at the system, we need to understand and not be shocked by the possibilities, by what not, and we really don't even know what the probabilities are. We don't know what's likely and what isn't. These are assumptions, but there are several possibilities. And we need to understand that, look, we are under attack. It's not pleasant and it's constant, and we need to get used to that, because human beings and nature herself adapts to the environmental conditions. Basically, if you have a stressful environment, you're either going to submit to it or you're going to transcend it. You're going to get better than it. You're going to exercise, and your muscles are going to build when there's resistance. This is why I mentioned partly the story of Job, where I said that, look, the story itself is unsatisfactory. As far as I'm concerned, it was basically somebody telling people that don't question, you can't understand what's going on. You're either too primitive, or even if you did understand, it would make no difference at this evolutionary stage. But there are hints saying that manifestation has certain properties, certain divine emanations that are specific to manifestations that the Bible calls sons of God, Benai Elohim, or emanations, divine emanations that are not angels as we know them. They're principalities that work differently. And Satan is one of those, and Satan is the embodiment of manifestations' resistance to our desires, and that this is part of the way manifestation works. There are checks and balances, so to speak, in order for someone to not monopolize prosperity, to not monopolize fortune, the probabilities, and in order for suffering to be able to be evenly distributed in a certain sense, or that kind of opportunity to distribute the energy of suffering so healing can occur. If anywhere in the world there is suffering, the rest of the world should be able to perceive it and not really involve itself, in the business of anybody, but as an energy to deal with it. And because, time and space function differently in that internal sense, anytime you heal something that you perceive in the collective, in yourself, then that healing transfers to the collective itself and helps the situation. And things tend to work out according to the means and the ways available to manifestation at the time.
One of the things,
And I'm
Aristo, I'm
saying,
going to interrupt
yeah,
you for a second. One of the things that
yeah.
I found really interesting when you were talking about Job in the earlier take is that you said most likely he was a king or some kind of a ruler, and he had kept himself pretty immune from all of the suffering that was in the world around him. And then when the Elohim, when the sons of God came and gathered, and Satan said, but you built a hedge around him, and he had to actually go and taste the suffering for himself, which I'm adding to what you said, it may be indicative of what might be happening in our world today, that those that have felt themselves immune from the suffering of humanity might find themselves in a position where they're going to have their own Job experience. What do you think of that
This,
idea?
I think you extended the idea very well, what I was saying. Because if you look at Job, the thing should be looked at universally and not from, I think the story indirectly is trying to tell us this too. You can't understand anything if you're taking the point of view of the three friends of Job who are giving him advice, chastising him. And any one individual basically does not give you the full picture. They give you a certain point of view that can be misleading, because Job said, when Job was okay, the world was fine, even though outside of the hedge there was a lot of suffering. And then all of these marauders come and take his property and kill his children and slaughter his flocks, so to speak, and all of that. But the point is that what drove the marauders? Are they just evil, or were they people who were, usually in those days there was a plague or a famine, and people had to resort to piracy or that kind of thing in order to survive. Everything is connected, and then a psychopath would take advantage of the situation. Unless there's existing misery, most people don't listen to psychopaths. And we can't understand this today because psychopaths have instilled themselves purposely, because they know that they can't depend on continuous acts of God, so to speak, the continuous acts of nature in order to take advantage of situations. They need to take control.
That's why they have
So
weather,
now
weather
Yeah,
modification and stuff like that.
exactly. They've created a matrix. They've taken the natural matrix, which had occasional situations of rebalancing, and we tend to accept that. But I think we tend to accept that because most of us live in a technological matrix that is not subject to as many calamities as the natural matrix was in the past. If you read ancient history, you're going to see a shitload of weather events, of tidal waves, of earthquakes, of fires, of even rocks falling from the sky, and especially plagues. And so, a lot of these were attributed to magic, to sorcery, and that's why people burned witches and stuff. But these days, we have a controlled technological matrix where the same negativity has been channeled, resourced, and weaponized, rather than being used in a more amateurish manner if there was weaponization through sorcery and stuff of that type, or random, etc. But the point is that we know nature has balancing effects. We know that if you're infected, you're going to get a fever. And thus, if Job was in the position of isolating himself, it's like the New Agers can be Job. The psychopaths can be Job. Everybody can be Job. Everybody who thought that things were going well, who was asleep, who was relatively satisfied and was denying their own quiet desperation. In my opinion, Job is more a prophetic book than even the Apocalypse of John is. And I'm having a little bit of a difficulty talking because people are talking next to me and they're trying to talk louder than me to make themselves heard to each other. So as long as my voice is coming out clearly on your end, things
I'm
are okay.
actually not hearing the interference that you're describing.
Oh, that's cool, because I've changed my headphones and I'm using a microphone now that's very close to my mouth, so I'm glad it filters it out. That said, I've been thinking about the story of Job. I tried to read it once, and I'm looking for the Hebrew version. I was looking at the biblical, various translations and stuff. But eventually I looked at the idea that Job is a very deep mystical work that the average person cannot understand, because they're either in denial, either they have a hedge around them, or else when the hedge falls down, they get overwhelmed with suffering and calamity and can't think, they can't function. So it's either one or the other. So when we have these warnings like Job or the apocalypse, and even the stuff that some of us see that the psychopaths are intending to do, the constant fear porn, the threats and all of that, even when we have that, that can be a kind of prompting to prepare ourselves for uprooting our own hedges. We don't have to let Satan, so to speak, or that force uproot our hedges. At this point, the underworld is coming to the surface. The book of Revelation says that Satan's going to be roaming around the world. And if this is the same Satan that appeared in the book of Job, this is basically the resistance against all of the karma that has occurred to date. Everything. And this affects the whole human species. That's why when they say, well, babies are not innocent, it's not a matter of criminal innocence or guilt. It's a matter of, well, by virtue of being human, you can't separate yourself from the cause and effect that's going on. So, if I was saying in the previous conversation in a nutshell, if we can master our own process of acceptance and of tearing down the hedge and of opening up to the world, to the point that we can open up to the suffering at a deepest level on our terms. It doesn't have to overwhelm us. It's going to really make us uncomfortable. And I think most people are terrified of it. Otherwise, they wouldn't turn away from all these people complaining and all of these stories. You know, other people have another defense mechanism. They gloat. They think, they deserve it, or they laugh and all of this. And so, you know, people's brain connections are being altered in a sense by conditioning them to defend themselves in that manner, to actually turn it all into a joke. And many of the zombies are like this, you know, where they throw out compassion because it's a liability. But we can actually benignly weaponize our compassion, not weaponize it in the sense of conflict, but resource it, repurpose it, and clear out our own hedges to open the gateways, to open the gates that the Bible tells us the devil or the angels or the other, some ET is going to open for us. And we can step up and say, no, I'm opening this gate and I'm feeling everything. And I'm going to be honest about what I feel. But because I have done this, I have the right to do it on my terms. I am not going to be overwhelmed. There's a third solution. You don't have to be hedged in or flooded out. Like Noah, if you take Noah as a psychic symbol, it's the flooding of the underworld came to the surface again, and it hit a reset. You know, we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, what we're doing
So
is
there's
we're
things.
not just going in a reset, but you use the word repurposing, and that's an excellent word to use because I think that's what we need to do with all of the structures that have served us negatively. We need to turn those same structures and tools around and use them positively. People keep arguing that the structure is evil or something like that, but structures are neither good nor evil. They just are. And it's how they're used that makes the difference, as I see it anyway.
I agree. And here's the point, though. A structure, as we said, alone is adversarial. A structure is a dead thing that holds, that doesn't involve movement. It's not dynamic. And basically, we have to plug in to empower the structure to give life to it. If people address the structures as something that, like an automaton, like what the psychopaths are doing, they want to create a kind of panopticon that's artificial intelligence. If we give our own intelligence over to an artificial intelligence, the structures are going to betray us, whether it's psychopathically driven or whatever, because psychopathy is an artificial intelligence too. It's not natural. It's an unnatural type of adaptation. And under conditions where people turn away and go into denial. It's a result of denial. So if we try to retain the structures with the mindset most people have today, they're going to betray us again. We can repurpose them and expect these leaders to do something or people to do something, but if we retain the same attitude, it's going to go right back, and it's going to go right back fast, and it's going to go right back a lot worse than it was before because we've betrayed our own aspirations. So if we're going to be true to our aspirations, we need to change our mindset from what it was into something that is worthy of the repurposing, that represents the repurposing that we claim we want. You know, instead of trying to escape the situation through beating around the bush, through argumentation, through saying no. I mean, it's good to point out the possibilities that some people are, you know, some sources may be deceptive. But it doesn't matter if many of them are deceptive or not. It's you know, if we are awake enough, then we can either catch the deception for sure, or we can find something else around it. The UN and all of this, they can work because any deception, you know, in order for the UN, the sugarcoating can be transmuted into nourishment, in other words. In order for them to pass their lies, they've had to convince us that, you know, something like the UN was actually worthwhile, and they actually used valid arguments. If countries work together, many good things can happen. If people work together, this is a truth, because cooperation breeds progress and creativity.
Absolutely.
So, exactly. So what we want is an assurance that we have to create. We can't expect the assurance to come from the outside. We amongst ourselves, even if we believe, look, I don't want to go out and be a sacrifice, I don't want to die, I don't want to make a war or a bloody revolution, but I do want to stand with my fellow human beings toward a kind of solidarity geared toward getting an assurance, getting a fact that, look, we're keeping watch on you. People can say, look, we're keeping an eye on a certain process and we're ready to intervene in some way if this process, because as you said, there are well meaning people and we see that everywhere. But most of these well meaning people are isolated, just like each of us connects over the internet with other people. Even you say, okay, I can have a long distance relationship, it's right at my back door, that it doesn't seem to be working. This is an archetypal thing, it's general, it's in everything. Well-meaning people are purposely isolated from each other, not because the psychopaths have organized society that way, but because denial has structured human behavior so that anybody who is well meant has to face a hedge of the denial of their own subconscious and of everybody else. They have to tear down that hedge. And that is what we are learning to do. As this is going on, we are going to see things happening on the outside. And I don't believe we should be interpreting these things in a simplistic manner of black and white. For example, there are three major power blocks in terms of countries. Although and there's one corporation that that connects to all these other corporations, and people have done studies and they've actually revealed this. And there are three major power blocks: the Chinese, the Russians, and the Western bloc that is pretending to be two different blocks, the European and the American bloc. The thing is that the people running these blocks are mostly authoritarians. They're not leaders, they're bosses, and they don't want to lose their power. They're also apparently fighting between them, and the corporation is trying to convince them, waging its own war of paranoia against them, that the true enemy is the people. And so it's a mass confusion of well meaning people trying to do something. Each of these well meaning people have hedges around them. And then when you see well meaning people get together, you see hedges being erected between them often, or they factionalize. This is the whole hedging of the situation. And the force of Satan, as we would say, comes in and overwhelm, because this is the fact that, well, this hedge is not a factor of manifestation. It is erroneous protection. It is a source of protection that cuts off the lifeblood of of manifestation of human society, and we need to get that circulation going again. And we're learning how to do this by integrating our internal state and the discernment that the internal state brings about with the external world. As I said, you cannot explain things just externally, and you cannot use the internal state as a kind of, safety zone. An empowered person doesn't need safety zones because they are resourceful. And so the whole thing is a little bit something in the middle between the liberal view that distorts itself into the nanny state where we're all taken care of. Like somebody said, well, I don't think government should be given the money. They should be given to the people directly. And it's like, well, before that happens, then the solution is to make sure that governments represent the people. you know, you can't just throw money at the people, because people are going to undergo the process that happens to animals. If you feed the animals in the zoo, they're going to bite your hand off. That's what happens to beings in captivity. When beings are conditioned to slavery, you don't just throw wealth at them. They will go insane because they haven't dealt with the trauma of their slavery yet.
Right,
All of
and then
these
we've
things,
seen that
you know,
demonstrated again and again when people win the lottery, for example. They
exactly,
absolutely
exactly.
do not know how to handle wealth because they've never they've gotten it without actually developing the consciousness for it. So they abuse the wealth, and it destroys them rather than and lifts them out of a hole or out of poverty. They're out of poverty, but they're still self destructive.
Well, you have to get this also from an esoteric point of view, in my opinion, because you have to consider that, okay, let's say somebody wins $100 million in the lottery, okay? Now, this is made, this is the money accumulated from the lottery tickets. Let's say a lottery ticket is $1. 100 million people have bought lottery tickets on the hope, and most of them were desperate for money on the hope that they're going to win. And when that hope is dashed, that energy that they have invested becomes resentment. It goes sour. And so you have $100 million bills that are infected with the resentment of 100 million people. When your gain is based on the loss of everybody else, it's going to turn sour. That money was condemned from the very beginning, that whole lottery mindset. Now the psychopaths are working on the same principle. Their gains are all on the blood of everybody else, but they have learned to become middlemen of despair, middlemen of negativity. They have learned to weaponize it and thus take the negativity and turn it and destroy the earth. Ancient peoples used sacrificing and scapegoating for the same thing. Basically transfer it to some poor innocent, so to speak, or whatever, or turn it back. And that's why they guilt trip us all the time. However, this happens because we have our hedges up, and so the so-called Satan force has to tear down our hedges before it addresses the hedges of the psychopaths. It's almost like the psychopaths are using us to build their hedges. We are the thorns. Our suffering and our resentment is used as the hedge against their denial. They're focusing us away from ourselves, from our own self-redemption, into all of these blind alleys and terrorist things in order to protect their own hedges. And we can reorient our awareness and look at every event from the point of view of what is the quality of energy behind the event. If the goal that anybody has is based on human suffering, and all of the gold more or less is, then before we can actually use it constructively, we need to address the whole issue of human suffering as an energy within ourselves. And that's where I mentioned that, look, the way I see it, and I've contacted these energies. I mean, I've opened up to this state, and I know how difficult it is because the body clenches up itself. It shuts down. The reflex to protect yourself from this kind of terror that's even beyond the terror of, a cop breaking down your door. That just begins to touch it. And then when the terror reaches paralysis and complete numbness, to awaken that boundary line right before where the terror becomes so intense that you pass out, but before you do, and maintain a lucidity to be able to tell the energy that you're present with it. God is actually with you then. That's when God is with you. And that's when you actually can begin, paradoxically, to feel the top of the mountain right at the depths of hell. However, this is something everybody, and I mean myself included, I went through trying everything else before I even moved in that direction. And because it's the last thing anybody wants to do. Otherwise, it would have been done already. This was avoided by the mystics themselves. When Job was written, the collective of humanity couldn't even comprehend something like that. It was just beginning to come to the surface. But now the time is fulfilled, so to speak. The underworlds are coming to the surface because we are whether we know it or not, are prepared to bring down our own hedges. And, that's how I view the situation as far as that goes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to have to re-listen to that because some of the things that you were saying, I think, ooh, yeah, it's a deep subject, and you
Yes.
bring out things that certainly expand my awareness into areas that my normal thought patterns don't go. So that's the benefit actually of communicating like we're doing. And I'm sure you do the same thing for other people, not just for me. Uh, but anyway, we're right near the half hour mark, and I think the audio I didn't notice any distortion at all, and hopefully what it's recorded will be perfect as well. Do you have anything you'd like to say, closing this or wrapping up?
No, I think, as you said, yes, these are very, very deep topics. And I've been focusing in, and partly, I've always kind of thought this way, in a way that was beyond the norm, and it kind of, to some point, it insulated me from society. Well, not insulated, but it alienated me to a certain point. But at the same time, this is why communication is important, because I don't feel I sense this way of perception, for example, is truly alien to the natural state. That anybody who is able to look within in a way that challenges their status quo can do this. And this is partly where discernment comes in, because it's what thinking outside the box is all about, where you take the common thought and the common notion and turn it around in 3 dimensions. Instead of looking at it in 2 dimensions at the face that it's what's facing you, you can actually grab it and say, well, how can I do this? It's only 2 dimensions. Well, try it in your imagination. Take your idea and turn it around and feel if there's any resistance in doing so, and feel what's behind it. Sometimes what's behind it is something terrible. And it's not terrible in itself, but it's our fear. It's our conditioning. It's the reprimand from the matrix telling us not to turn it around, not to think this way. So I believe that even if a few people can stretch themselves to integrate the internal and the external and actually really go outside the box and forget about the whole box situation at all, instead of just throwing the cliche around or even doing the best they can as they're used to doing it, then a 10th monkey effect, a 50th monkey effect, and then a 100th monkey effect can start vibrating in the atmosphere. And before we know it, we can start addressing these issues in a different manner, than we have before, plus perceiving them in a different manner. And thus, repurposing can actually become something both creative and wonderful, instead of some hope that everybody thinks is a life preserver, and it really isn't. It's really the ground upon which we stand, and we have to walk that ground. Okay, that's what I wanted to say, and I really hope that this carries through. We're almost at 33 minutes,
Yeah.
and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Aristo. You have a good week, and I have a feeling just from what I've witnessed so far that probably this one will probably be a take and a go with it. So even though I didn't want to do the didn't want to do it over again, it's probably best that we did. Thank you very much.
Okay, you
Okay.
too.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye bye.